It was a quiet Thursday morning when my phone rang. I was just finishing my second cup of coffee, trying to clear the haze of sleep from my mind. The number flashing on the screen wasn't familiar, but something about it made me pause before answering. "Hello," I said, cautiously. "Hi, this is Denise from the Los Angeles County Emergency Operations Center," a calm voice replied. "Is this Mark Jefferson?" "Yes," I said, sitting up straighter. My heart skipped a beat. "Is everything okay?" She hesitated, and in that pause, my imagination ran wild. My mother had flown to Los Angeles just 3 days ago to visit some old friends. It was supposed to be a relaxing getaway, a chance to reconnect. But now my chest tightened as Denise continued. "I'm calling regarding the wildfire situation in the Los Angeles area," she said. "We understand that your mother, Susan Jefferson, is currently staying in Beverly Hills. The fire has spread rapidly, and we're conducting evacuations." The world tilted slightly. Wildfires? Beverly Hills? Mom hadn't mentioned anything about this when we spoke last night. Evacuations? I repeated, my voice sounding distant. "Is she safe?" "We're coordinating rescue efforts," Denise said. "But communications are limited in some areas. We're doing everything we can." My grip tightened around the phone. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Mom always made sure to send me pictures of her trips, her grinning beside some landmark or enjoying a sunset. But today, there was only silence, and it was unbearable. After hanging up, I sat frozen, my phone still clenched in my hand. My thoughts were a whirlwind of worry. Every image I'd ever seen of wildfires, walls of flame, choking smoke, helicopters dropping water, played through my mind like a slideshow. Was Mom caught in the middle of that chaos? I grabbed my laptop and typed "Los Angeles fire" into the search bar. The news was grim. The wildfire had spread over thousands of acres, forcing entire neighborhoods to evacuate. The map showed the flames edging closer to Beverly Hills, where Mom was staying. My chest felt tight as I imagined her trying to navigate unfamiliar streets with smoke blinding her and panic gripping the city. Mom wasn't the type to panic, though. She was the glue that held our family together after Dad passed away. A retired nurse, she was calm under pressure and always quick to reassure me when life got overwhelming. But now, it was her safety in question, and I felt helpless. As the minutes ticked by, I found myself scrolling through photos on my phone. There she was, standing proudly in front of the Grand Canyon on a road trip we took years ago, her straw hat tilted jauntily against the wind. Another showed her beaming at my wedding, her hands clasped tightly around mine and my wife's. I couldn't let her face this alone. I grabbed my car keys, a hastily packed bag, and my phone. I didn't know exactly what I was planning to do, but one thing was certain, I was heading to Los Angeles. The drive from San Diego to Los Angeles, which usually felt like a routine trip, was anything but. Traffic was already heavier than usual, news of the wildfire had people on edge, and the freeway was clogged with cars heading in every direction. Emergency vehicles sped past on the shoulder, their lights flashing urgently, a grim reminder of what lay ahead. I turned on the radio, hoping for updates. The broadcaster's voice was steady, but the news wasn't comforting. The fire, now being referred to as the Palisades Blaze, has spread to over 50,000 acres in just 48 hours. Residents in Beverly Hills, Holmby Hills, and surrounding areas have been urged to evacuate immediately. Strong winds continue to fuel the flames, making containment efforts challenging. I turned the volume down and gripped the steering wheel tighter. My heart pounded with every mile marker I passed. What if Mom was still in her friend's house, unaware of how quickly things were escalating? Or worse, what if she'd tried to leave and gotten caught in the chaos? I didn't know her exact location, and her phone was going straight to voicemail every time I tried to call. I glanced at the passenger seat, where my phone rested with the GPS map open. The red fire zone overlay on the map seemed to grow larger every time I glanced at it. I had no idea how close I'd be able to get to Beverly Hills, but I was determined to try. Memories of Mom's voice echoed in my mind. She'd been so excited about this trip. You know, Mark, sometimes you have to step out of your comfort zone. You've been working too hard, too serious for your own good. Take it from me, we all need to breathe new air every now and then. I'd laughed and brushed it off. Maybe next time, Mom. Someone's got to keep the lights on. And now I was wondering if I'd been too dismissive. Had I been taking her for granted? Suddenly, my thoughts were interrupted by the sight of black smoke curling in the distance. It wasn't just on the horizon anymore, I could see it billowing upward like a dark column, ominous and foreboding. I rolled down the window slightly, and the acrid smell of burning vegetation filled the car. Even miles away, it was unmistakable. A detour sign loomed ahead, and a police checkpoint diverted all vehicles off the main freeway. An officer in a neon vest waved me to a stop. "Sir, this area is closed to non-essential travel," he said, leaning down to my window. His face was streaked with soot, and the lines of exhaustion around his eyes made him look much older than he probably was. "I need to get to Beverly Hills," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "My mother's there, and I haven't been able to reach her. Please." He sighed, glancing at the chaos behind him. "What's her address?" I hesitated, realizing I didn't know the exact one. "She's staying with a friend on Hillcrest Drive," I managed. The officer shook his head. "That area's already under mandatory evacuation. We can't let anyone through. If she's in the evacuation zone, she'll be directed to one of the shelters." He rattled off the names of a few locations, but his words barely registered. "What if she hasn't evacuated yet?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "What if she needs help?" The officer's expression softened slightly, but his tone remained firm. "We're doing everything we can. If you want to help her, head to one of the shelters and see if she's there. But I can't let you drive into the fire zone, it's too dangerous." Frustrated, I pulled over to the side of the road to regroup. Smoke was thick in the air now, and even with the windows rolled up, I could feel it scratching at my throat. I opened my phone and started looking up the shelters he mentioned. The first one on the list was a high school gym about 20 miles away. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. I turned the car around and headed in that direction, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if she wasn't there? What if she had tried to leave too late? I forced myself to push those thoughts aside. I had to believe she was safe. I had to keep going. When I finally arrived at the shelter, the scene was chaotic. Families huddled together on gym mats, clutching blankets and water bottles. Volunteers rushed around, distributing supplies and calming scared children. The air was heavy with the smell of smoke and disinfectant, and the noise of anxious chatter filled the space. I approached the check-in table, where a tired-looking woman was flipping through a clipboard. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm looking for my mother, Susan Jefferson. Have you seen her?" She glanced up, sympathy flashing in her eyes, and then began scanning the list. "Susan Jefferson. No, I don't see that name here. But people are still coming in from the evacuation zones. There's another shelter at the community center across town. She might have gone there." I thanked her and turned to leave, but a familiar voice stopped me in my tracks. "Mark." I spun around so fast I nearly dropped my bag. There she was, standing near the edge of the gym, her face smudged with soot but unmistakably hers. Relief crashed over me like a tidal wave, and I ran to her, wrapping her in the tightest hug I could manage. "Mom," I choked out. "You're okay." She pulled back, her eyes filled with tears but her voice steady. "I'm okay, Mark. But I didn't think I'd see you here." "What are you doing?" "What am I doing?" I said, laughing through the tears. "What else could I do? You're my mom." Her smile was small but genuine, and she leaned into the hug again. For the first time all day, I felt like I could breathe. We sat together on a pair of folding chairs near the back of the gym, away from the main cluster of evacuees. I couldn't stop staring at her, the relief of finding her safe still washing over me in waves. Mom looked exhausted but steady, her soot-streaked face a testament to how close she'd been to the danger. "Tell me everything," I urged, gripping her hand. "What happened?" She sighed, her shoulders sagging as she leaned back. "It started yesterday morning. We heard there was a fire, but it was way up in the hills. The news kept saying it wasn't a threat to Beverly Hills yet, so we didn't worry too much. By evening, though, the wind had shifted, and things started getting bad." She paused, her eyes distant as she replayed the events. "We could see the smoke getting closer, and the ash started falling like snow. That's when I told Ellen, her friend, that we needed to pack up and leave. She wanted to wait, said the authorities would tell us if it was really dangerous." "But you didn't wait?" I asked, my stomach twisting at the thought of her staying in the path of the fire. She shook her head. "I couldn't. Something about it felt wrong. I packed a bag, and when Ellen finally agreed, we got in the car. But by then, the streets were gridlocked. Everyone was trying to leave at the same time, and it was chaos. The sky was orange, Mark, like it was on fire. I've never seen anything like it." I swallowed hard, imagining her caught in that nightmare. "How did you get out?" "It was touch and go for a while. We had to reroute twice because roads were blocked, and at one point, I thought we wouldn't make it. The smoke was so thick I could barely see the car in front of us. But eventually, we made it here." Her voice faltered, and she gave me a weak smile. "I kept thinking about you. I didn't know if I'd ever get the chance to tell you how much I love you." My throat tightened, and I reached over to squeeze her hand. "Mom, don't say that. You're here. You're safe." She nodded, but her eyes were glassy. "I know. It just puts things into perspective, doesn't it? What really matters." Before I could respond, a voice crackled over the shelter's loudspeaker. "Attention, evacuees, we've received an update from emergency services. The fire is now 60% contained, and some areas may be safe for return tomorrow. Please remain here until further notice." The room erupted in murmurs, some relieved, others anxious. I turned back to Mom. "Do you think Ellen's okay?" "She's fine," Mom said. "We got separated when we got here, but she texted me earlier. She's with another group." Relief swept over me again. "Good. I'm just glad you're out of there." We sat in silence for a moment, the chaos of the shelter fading into the background. I was exhausted from the drive, and she was drained from the ordeal, but neither of us wanted to let go of the moment. It felt fragile, like a glass orb we were afraid to drop. "Mark," she said finally, her voice low. "You didn't have to come all this way, you know. I could have handled it." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "You're kidding, right? There's no way I could just sit back and wait for news. You're my mom. Of course I came." Her expression softened, and for a moment, the years seemed to melt away. She wasn't just my mom, the invincible force who always had it together. She was human, scared, vulnerable, and grateful. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. The shelter quieted as night fell, the energy in the gym shifting from anxious activity to restless stillness. Volunteers moved through the rows of cots, offering bottled water and blankets to those still awake. I sat with Mom on a couple of plastic chairs, a blanket draped over her shoulders as we watched the dim overhead lights flicker. "You should try to get some sleep," I told her. "You've been through a lot." She gave me a tired smile, but I could see the tension still etched on her face. "I will. But I can't stop thinking about all the people who might still be out there." Her words hit me harder than I expected. She wasn't just talking about herself or her friend Ellen, she was thinking of the hundreds, maybe thousands, of people displaced by the fire. It was so like her to carry the weight of others' struggles, even in the midst of her own. "Everyone here is safe now," I said, my voice gentle. "And the fire's getting under control. They said it's 60% contained." She nodded, but I wasn't sure if I'd convinced her. I pulled out my phone and checked for updates, scrolling through news headlines and social media posts. One video caught my eye, a helicopter view of the fire taken earlier in the day. The camera panned over a landscape of charred hills and glowing embers, the scale of destruction staggering. My stomach churned at the thought of how close Mom had been to that devastation. "Mark," Mom said softly, breaking my focus. "What about you? Have you slept at all?" I chuckled, rubbing the back of my neck. "Not really. It's hard to relax when all I can think about is you being safe." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Well, I'm safe now. And tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest." Her voice was steady, but the exhaustion behind it was unmistakable. She leaned back in the chair, her head resting against the wall, and closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing slowed, and I realized she'd drifted off. I stayed awake a while longer, watching her sleep. She looked so small and fragile in that moment, nothing like the strong, confident woman who'd raised me. The fire had taken so much from so many, but it hadn't taken her. For that, I was endlessly grateful. Eventually, I settled into the chair beside her, pulling my jacket tighter against the chill of the gym. The hum of quiet conversations and the distant shuffle of footsteps lulled me into a light, uneasy sleep, my thoughts still circling the day's events. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, I was content to sit by her side and hold on to the relief that she was safe. The shelter stirred to life with the first light of dawn. Volunteers moved quietly, setting up tables of coffee and prepackaged snacks. The buzz of conversation returned, a mix of cautious optimism and lingering fear. I woke with a stiff neck and a blanket someone must have draped over me during the night. Mom was already awake, sitting on the edge of her chair with her phone in hand. Her face lit up when she saw me stir. "Good morning," she said softly, holding out a cup of coffee. "Morning," I replied, accepting it gratefully. The coffee was lukewarm and overly sweet, but I didn't care. "Any news?" She nodded and handed me her phone. "They're lifting evacuation orders in some areas. Hillcrest Drive isn't clear yet, but they're optimistic it will be soon." Relief washed over me. The fire, though devastating, was finally being contained. People would be able to go home, or at least what was left of their homes. "What about Ellen?" I asked. "She texted me early this morning," Mom said. "She's at another shelter and doing okay. They might let her go back later today, depending on how things go." I leaned back, letting the weight of the past day settle. The worst of it seemed to be over, but there was still so much uncertainty. "What about you? Are you planning to head back when they give the all clear?" Mom hesitated, staring into her coffee cup. "I don't know. I'm not sure what's waiting for me there. Even if the house is fine, it won't feel the same." Her words hung in the air. She was right, disasters had a way of changing everything, even if the physical damage could be repaired. "Maybe it's a sign," I said after a moment. "A chance to take a break, come back home for a while." She looked up at me, a small smile playing on her lips. "Home, huh? You mean so you can keep an eye on me?" I laughed, but the truth of it hit closer to home than I expected. "Maybe. It's been a long time since we've spent more than a weekend together. I wouldn't mind." Her smile softened, and she reached over to pat my hand. "We'll see. Let's get through today first." The announcement came mid-morning. Areas near Beverly Hills, including Hillcrest Drive, were being cleared for residents to return. Mom's name was called along with a small group of others. She rose from her chair and turned to me, her expression a mix of determination and trepidation. "You coming with me?" she asked. Of course, I said, grabbing our things. As we left the shelter and stepped into the fresh air, the sky was hazy but brighter than the day before. Ash still floated faintly in the breeze, a reminder of how close disaster had come. Mom slipped her arm through mine as we headed to the car. Whatever's waiting for us, I'm glad you're here. I gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. Always, Mom. Always. The drive back to Hillcrest Drive was surreal. The streets that had been clogged with panicked traffic just a day before were eerily quiet, the air still thick with the lingering smell of smoke. As we got closer to the neighborhood, the damage became more apparent. Charred trees lined the roads, their blackened branches stretching toward the sky like skeletons. The ground was covered in a fine layer of ash, and here and there, remnants of burned fences and mailboxes hinted at the destruction. Mom was silent in the passenger seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I glanced over at her, unsure of what to say. What words could possibly make this easier? When we turned onto Hillcrest Drive, I braced myself for the worst. But to my astonishment, Mom's friend Ellen's house stood untouched, a lone island of safety amid the devastation. The grass in the front yard was scorched, but the structure itself seemed unscathed. Mom let out a breath she'd been holding, her voice shaky. It's still here. We parked in the driveway, and I helped her out of the car. The smell of soot was overpowering, and the air felt unnaturally still. She fumbled with her keys, her hands trembling as she unlocked the front door. The interior was just as they'd left it, furniture untouched, photos still hanging on the walls. But a thin layer of ash had crept inside, settling on every surface like a ghostly reminder of how close they'd come to losing it all. I can't believe it, Mom murmured, running her fingers over the back of the couch. Her expression was a mix of relief and sorrow. So many people lost everything, and we were spared. It's okay to feel lucky, I said gently. But it's also okay to feel everything else. She nodded, her eyes welling with tears. It's overwhelming, Mark. Just thinking about what could have happened. I stepped closer and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You don't have to go through this alone. I'm here, okay? She leaned into me for a moment before pulling away, a determined look replacing her earlier vulnerability. There's work to do. We should check the back, make sure everything's okay. The backyard had taken more damage than the front. The patio furniture was singed, and part of the wooden fence had collapsed into a pile of blackened rubble. Beyond the yard, the hills that had once been lush and green were now barren and charred. We stood there for a long moment, taking it all in. It's going to take time, Mom said finally, her voice steady. But we'll get through this. I turned to her, impressed by her resilience. You always do. She smiled faintly, then gestured to the patio. Let's start by cleaning this up. It'll feel good to do something productive. I nodded, rolling up my sleeves. Together, we began clearing the debris, one piece at a time. Would you like the next part to focus on the emotional aftermath, the neighborhood, or something else entirely? After we finished tidying up the backyard, Mom insisted on taking a walk through the neighborhood. I need to see how everyone else is doing, she said, grabbing a scarf to wrap around her nose and mouth. I followed her down the street, where the reality of the fire's destruction became painfully clear. Some houses stood untouched, like Ellen's, while others were reduced to little more than charred foundations. It was a patchwork of survival and devastation, and every step brought a new wave of emotions. We passed a man sweeping ash from his driveway, his expression blank with exhaustion. Further down, a woman stood staring at the ruins of her home, clutching a photo frame she must have pulled from the wreckage. Mom approached her without hesitation. Hi, she said softly, her voice full of empathy. I'm Susan. Are you okay? The woman looked up, her face streaked with soot and tears. I don't know, she whispered, holding up the frame. This is all I could save. Everything else is gone. Mom reached out and gently touched the woman's arm. "I'm so sorry," she said. "If there's anything I can do, anything you need, please let me know." The woman nodded, her lip trembling, and Mom stayed with her for a moment longer before we moved on. "That's just like you," I said as we walked. "What is?" "Jumping in to help a stranger when you're still figuring things out yourself." She gave me a small smile, though her eyes remained somber. "Sometimes helping someone else is the only way to make sense of your own feelings." Further down the street, we came across a group of neighbors gathered around a pickup truck filled with bottled water and food supplies. A man handed out items while others hugged and shared updates. "Hey, Susan," someone called out, and Mom turned to see Ellen waving her over. They embraced tightly, both women visibly relieved to see each other safe. Ellen introduced me to the others, and we joined the group, listening as people shared their stories. Some recounted harrowing escapes through thick smoke, while others described the heartbreak of returning to find their homes destroyed. The resilience of the community was striking. Despite their losses, these neighbors were coming together, pooling their resources, and supporting one another. "This is what matters," Mom said quietly, gesturing to the group. "Not the houses or the things we lost. It's the people." I nodded, feeling a lump rise in my throat. Watching her, I realized just how much of her strength had always been rooted in her compassion for others. By the time we returned to Ellen's house, the sun was dipping low on the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the charred landscape. The contrast was striking, a reminder that even after destruction, there was beauty to be found. "Today was hard," Mom said as we stepped inside. "But it was good, too. I needed to see the neighborhood, to know what's next." "You're amazing, you know that," I said, setting down my bag. She laughed softly, shaking her head. "I'm just doing what I can. That's all anyone can do." The next morning, the world seemed a little calmer. The skies were clearer, and the heavy scent of smoke had lessened. It felt like the first step toward normalcy, though the road ahead would be anything but easy. Mom and I sat on the back patio, sipping coffee from mismatched mugs we'd found in Ellen's kitchen. The chairs were dusty, the air still carried a faint chill, but the quiet moment felt well-earned. "I've been thinking," she said after a while, staring out at the scorched hills. "About what you said yesterday. About coming back home for a while." I looked over, trying not to get my hopes up. "Yeah." She smiled faintly, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "It wouldn't be a bad idea. Not just to be closer to you, but to figure out what's next. Sometimes it's easier to see clearly when you step away for a bit." Relief swept over me, though I kept my tone casual. "I'd like that. And hey, the guest room's yours anytime." She laughed softly. "You might regret that when I start giving unsolicited advice about your cooking or how you fold your laundry." I grinned. "Bring it on, Mom." Later that day, as we packed up her belongings, we talked about the logistics of her stay with me. She wanted to help Ellen with the cleanup efforts before leaving, and I promised to come back on weekends if she needed me. Before I left, we walked the neighborhood one last time. The sense of community was even stronger now. Neighbors were working side by side to clear debris, sharing tools and offering support. Mom stopped often to chat, offering a kind word or helping hand wherever she could. As we stood at the edge of the neighborhood, overlooking the damaged hills, I turned to her. "It's not going to be easy, is it?" She shook her head, her expression resolute. "No. But rebuilding never is. You just have to take it one day at a time." I nodded, feeling a deep sense of pride in her strength. "And you don't have to do it alone. We've got each other, right?" She smiled and linked her arm through mine. "Always, Mark." Driving back home that evening, I thought about everything that had happened. The fire had taken so much, but it had also reminded me of what was truly important. My mom's resilience, her compassion, and her unwavering sense of hope were qualities I'd always admired but never fully appreciated until now. As the city lights came into view, I felt a quiet determination settle in my chest. Life would move forward, scarred but not defeated. And whatever came next, we'd face it together.